I'm really excited for all of us to be able to participate in this year's National Conference of Black Political Scientists. And I want to give a quick thank you to Tiffany Willoughby Herard for inviting us to participate. I'm really excited for our panel today, our Africatown Collaboration Roundtable panel. And the theme of this year's National Conference of Black Political Scientists is Visions of Black Futures at a Crossroads. Really exciting. So today, each of our speakers will have 5 to 10 minutes to present on, to contribute to the conversation on our roundtable. And then at the end, we'll have some time to have a more collaborative conversation and answer some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and let each individual speaker introduce themselves, but just kind of a clarification that we are all here as collaborators on the Africatown Oberlin Oral History Project, among other things. My name is Santiago Roman, and I use they, them pronouns. I graduated from Oberlin in 2020. So that all being said, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Their name is Ezimora. Thank you.
Thank you, Santi, for that handoff. And hello, everyone. Grateful to have the opportunity to speak with this wonderful group of people about a community and project that really shaped my understanding of environmental racism and community resilience. Like Santi said, my name is Ifi. I also go by Ifunanya, Ezimora, any pronouns. I currently am a clinical research coordinator, Juvenile Justice Behavioral Health Research Lab in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California, Cisco, but I became involved in Africatown during my time as a student at Oberlin College, where I was introduced to the team in 2015 by an upperclassman mentor that I had, and I spent all 4 years of my undergraduate experience collaborating with Africatown. And so today, for framing purposes, I'll be providing a brief background and contextual history for the relationship between Africatown and Oberlin College at an overarching level, and my teammates will go into finer detail about specific aspects of that collaboration. So just to start at some semblance of a beginning of it all, and Major Joe and Mr. Flen, I'm sure will be providing more context on this, but Africatown, Alabama is a suburb of Mobile and is currently populated by the descendants of the folks who arrived on the Clotilda in 1859 and founded Africatown in 1866. And the relationship building between Africatown and Oberlin started in 2014 at the Alberta Tar Sands Healing Walk. And a large part of this initial work was relationship building between Oberlin College faculty, staff, and students throughout various trips taken to Alabama throughout the academic years, summers, and trips from Africatown to Oberlin College. In Alabama, we went to meetings with various organizations in the community and in the greater Mobile area, like MAJAC, the Mobile Environmental Justice Action Coalition, CHESS, Clean, Healthy, Educated, Safe, and Sustainable Communities Incorporated. We went to city council meetings, planning commission meetings, et cetera, to just get more context. And showing up and being present at those events allowed us not only to see different perspectives and opposing opinions, because as we know, Black people are not a monolith, and a community has various needs and goals, and it's important to understand those nuances. But showing up and being present also allowed us to relationship build and show consistency in the community. And so earlier cohorts of collaborators from Oberlin College did some work with soil and testing of the land in Africatown. When I got involved in 2015, we started collaborating with a university local to Mobile to gather quantitative data via community health and environment surveys. And we canvassed different Africatown neighborhoods like Happy Hills and Magazine Point and Plateau to capture quantitative information about community awareness of polluting industries, the distribution of health disease, and recreational activities that had high participation rates in the community, like fishing, for example. What we're finding is that the paper copies of these health surveys that we had were quickly becoming blackened by scribbles of notes and storytelling that had occurred while we were verbally administering the surveys. We would go out to receive numbers on a small range of topics and came back with qualitative words and stories that painted a much more comprehensive and emotional picture than numbers could alone. In a 2000 paper on participatory resource strategies and nuclear risk management for Native communities, Quigley and other scholars actually stated that one of the facets to ensure equitable relationships between communities and researchers is as follows. Community knowledge and observations of disease excesses and environmental abnormalities must be integrated into the research process and not be rejected as anecdotal and subjective. And what we found that we had unknowingly fallen into this trap of what Quigley and others says of allowing solely quantitative research practices to dominate assessment and interpretation of health impacts, because we were asking people these very point blank questions of how many individuals in your family were diagnosed with XYZ disease. And folks were coming back to us with details of the impacts of health disease on family relations, flight, lineage, and painted images of specific detriments faced by community homes and common spaces in the area due to pollution. And I remember one of the first surveys I administered, this woman was telling me about how kids would go out and play in the snow, but it was Alabama and it wasn't snowing. It was just physical manifestations of pollution from nearby industries that would come down and enter the lungs of the kids playing outside and would stain their clothes drying on the clothesline with black and brown spots and burn little holes of acid through their cars parked outside. And one of the questions on the survey was, which of the following industries do you know about in the area? And folks would start reciting the list of polluting industries without even looking at the survey in my hands and without me even reading the list, because they just had known from this community knowledge. Or people would tell me the name of these different government officials that they had reached out to time and time again to express their concerns, only to hear nothing back after multiple efforts. And so this physical and emotional toll of environmental racism on community members was being lost in our quantitative surveys that were only capturing numerical data. And so we made this transition to an oral history project, which wasn't a sudden or unilateral decision. We actually met with collaborators in the Mobile County Training School Alumni Association and church groups to make sure we were embarking on a venture that people actually wanted and would be invested in. And people were invested because the storytelling that erupted from the surveys necessitated its own space. In addition to creating a platform through which local knowledge could be shared, the Oral History Project also aimed to achieve 3 different goals, one of which was documenting the lives and stories of elders in the community before they passed, preserving the traditions of the community previously lost to heavy pollution, and integrating youth as caretakers of the community's history and legacy to help create real connections between the past and the present. And so the Oral History Project has striven to underscore the importance of Africatown's community history, not only within Africatown, but also in Black and American history, as well as documenting the potential for its future. And with that, I will pass it over to Imani.
Hey, thank you, Ifi. Yes, thank you so much for just sharing the beginning of this collaboration and your experience as well, and just in the Oberlin and Africatown collaboration. So I'm Imani Badillo. I'm a current senior at Oberlin College, and I'm graduating in spring 2022 with majors in studio art and environmental studies. I've been a part of the Africatown relationship collaboration since 2019. And I want to share a bit more about the multi-step consent process as associated with the oral history research and the digital archive that we've been working on over the past few years. So I think the most central thing that I want to highlight is that just the most thorough and complete knowledge of Africatown comes from the community itself. And the Africatown community is truly the best expert of their own history. And so as Oberlin students and faculty have been visiting Africatown for years, I feel that we've been able to focus on developing respectful relationships in the research process. So this ongoing project is truly community-led. So it was as a request by the Africatown community that Oberlin students have been able to continue the tradition of the oral history and to preserve the voices of the community through the development of the digital archive. So in this research, we ensure that each historian remains at the center of the oral history through a two-step consent process. So first, before even beginning the actual interview, the interviewers explain the process of bringing the history into the digital archive. This includes the transcription of the interview once it's finished. It includes sharing the transcription and the interview with the historian for approval, and to make any additions or edits as needed. And then the second part of the consent process includes gaining publication consent for the oral history to be shared onto the digital archive. So in all the steps of this process, we make very clear that the historian holds all the rights to the interview. So any changes are completely up to the historian. And since they hold all the rights to the interview, they also may choose to keep their interview private or allow it to be taken down from the digital archive once it's released at any point in time. So yeah, being able to transcribe oral history interviews and to be able to conduct a few oral history interviews myself, it's also been very important to me that all the questions about this process are answered with complete transparency, keeping the wants, needs, and agency of the historian central to the sharing of the work. So this consent process also allows for the historians to focus on specific knowledge that they want to share as well. So in approving this transcript, historians can also verify dates, places, names, events, and give more context for understanding the physical history of Africatown. So in my experience, we've also been able to insert written stories into parts of the oral history videos themselves in order to expand upon specific experiences that can further highlight the Africatown community. Also, I think it's important to note, just like the oral history interviews include just like specific experiences in Mobile County Training School, in just really discussing all that like historians have learned and have remembered from like growing up in Africatown, discussing like familial traditions, and also just noting the ways in which the community grows and changes over time. And so something I've learned in this process is that collecting these oral histories is inherently a part of just like telling the truth about the history of Africatown, and like making that truth very as public as the community wants it to be is also important in being able to share that. And so when I came onto this project in 2019, I was able to really immediately meet historians through transcribing the oral history interviews. And then being able to get in touch with them, to talk with them about what they most want to share and what they want to make clear in their interview and in telling their story has also allowed me to be able to form these long-lasting relationships in addition to this research project. And I feel that this has been true for a lot of the Oberlin students that have been a part of the project as well. And so it's really exciting that the students can really take action in forming and maintaining trust with community members over time, and being able to continue to bring students onto the project that can maintain that trust is also extremely important. And this also allows students to understand how to make respectful connections in a research context, and how to maintain the community focus in the process. And much other academic research that I've seen has seemed very transactional, possibly sometimes holding research gains central rather than the community that could allow those findings to happen. And so in what I've experienced in Oberlin's relationship with Africatown, we've been able to like really use our resources, going to an institution to be of service to the community, remaining involved when invited, and also stepping back when the community asks. And so just keeping Africatown's history central to the oral histories also lies at the heart of putting together this digital archive, and also as well as to maintaining this relationship that has been built with the community. And so, yeah, I'd also like to invite Major Joe Womack to speak just a bit more about just like our relationship that we have on your end.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I really love the topic that we have here, the future of Africatown at a crossroads. And that's where we, first of all, let me say I'm a retired Marine Major, Joe Womack from Africatown native, born in 1950. And pretty much hung around the community with the exception of going off to college for 4 years and military for a couple of years, and then back to Mobile and the community of Africatown. So I know a little bit about the recent history, and I was taught by Henry Williams and others about some of the history before I got there. But the community has been at a crossroads for some time, and back when Oberlin got involved, we were really at a crossroads. I mean, the community had always been trying to protect itself, but it seems as though the city had made up their mind that they were going to pretty much just remove the community and just put a marker up that said Africatown used to be here. And there were members of the community, including myself, that was not going to happen. And so we were very fortunate that Africatown and Oberlin found each other, because one of the first things that Oberlin did when you all came down with the students, were to get involved with the environment and testing. And that's something that had never really, well, it has happened in Africatown, but the data was never distributed to members of the community or even to the media or anyone. As a matter of fact, when we finally got organized and started pushing back, we went to places like the EPA and the state environmental services, the local services, and even the Corps of Engineering, and no one had any data concerning testing in Africatown, even though International Paper and Scott Paper Company both sat there for over 70 years, right up on hovering over the community, and it was spewing out ash and other godly type emissions. And we did sort of a survey and found out that folks that was born around 1950, 1940, most of them weren't living to the age of 70. And the ones that were living to be real old, they were born before there was a expansion at International Paper and Scott's, in which they used some hazardous chemicals. So a lot had been going on, and the future of the community was really at a crossroad. And fortunately for us, Oberlin, you all got involved and sort of helped us, because those of you all that remember that when you first got there, first thing you did was stuck something in the ground and dug some dirt out, and that got all over the Mobile. It was in the paper and everything, and so that got their attention, and so that was one of the first times that the community had begun to sort of push back against some of the things that were happening negative against us, and that was only the beginning, but like I said earlier, we were at a crossroad then. We could have just buckled and gone under or fight back. And the community has always fought, has always been a fighter. And this was just simply another chapter in that fight that really began in earnest around 1910, 1920. And so Oberlin was very involved. And from there, we've got some more partners to come in and help us. But the value of what you all have done for us in Oberlin can never be overturned, and can never we can really never pay you back. We want you to keep coming. We want you to carve out a stake in the ground and build your own off campus there in Africatown if you want to. Just come on down. So. That's just a piece of the story, and I just wanted to say that. just get us started on. If I know Santiago said an hour, but next time let's make it 5 hours. You hear the real story. And I'll turn it over to my partner in crime, the Anderson Flen.
Thanks, Joyce. Good seeing all of you again. I'm in Atlanta. Joy and I, of course, grew up together and went to high school together, went to college together. And I tried to get rid of him, but he kept coming back like a dog. You keep feeding the dog and keep coming back and stuff. But I got involved partly because of, well, mostly because of Joe. I mean, I've always gone back to Africatown and always gone back, and I'm the president of the Alumni Association. And it was very, very important for me to I've always been involved with the community. And as Joe talked about the fact, I met the students and Janet from Oberlin after Joe and them had started the process. And as Joe stated, we really have never had a university or a college. And sometimes you need a stable institution that has a mission and a vision that connects with a community that is in need. And Africatown was strongly in need of a very, very strong, solid, mission-driven institution around environmental issues and social justice issues. And it was just a blessing, truly a blessing for Oberlin College to come into the life of Africatown. And of course, you've seen what has happened on a national, international stage. And we, and in them coming into this process, I think that people understood the history of your institution. And they understood that your institution carried a certain amount of weight with it in terms of its tradition. The same as Africatown has a rich tradition as well. And so I think the two coming together created a chemistry that has blossomed in so many ways, not only in the environmental ways, but also just in the friendship and the relationship ways that it has created a certain synergy that I tell people all the time when I think about the different colleges and universities that are involved with us now. Of course, Oberlin is at the top of that list in terms of leading the charge, not only from a mission-driven thing, but also from a personal-driven thing. I think that the students not only came to Africatown as a classroom setting, but I think they gained a lot more out of that in terms of personal relationships and friendships. And I think that is what has been central to our community. Our community is based on those relationships and that kinship. Whether you can or not, you still can, in a kind of an adoptive kind of process. That strength of that relationship propels us to continue to fight. That relationship has also, with the help of Oberlin, we have found and they have researched and documented facts that we had heard about, but we didn't have the documentation on it. And a perfect example of that is the Julius Rosenwald connection with Africatown, with Womack Training School. As the Rosenwald Fund is having a major thing going on now where they're trying to do a national thing in Chicago. When they reached out to the state of Alabama about Rosenwald schools, Womack Training School was not even mentioned and stuff. And so Oberlin's research, not only in the environmental issue, but in the educational way of helping us, has also strengthened us on a national scale. We're in conversation with the Rosenwald Foundation now in terms of talking about things. And the Oberlin students went to FIST and talked, contacted FIST and Chicago University and did all of that. So the research and the involvement has not just been in the environment part of this here, it's been in all of Africatown's finding things about Africatown and helping us to find the documentation and helping us to really substantiate who and what we are and what we already knew. We just didn't have the data. And that data from Oberlin is really helping us to push people back and push institutions back and push policies back. Joy will tell you in terms of some of the things in which you've done. Mobile has this thing of zoning going on now. And because of what you've done from Oberlin, it is hard for them to really treat and disrespect the Africatown community, because we've got the documentation, we've got the support, we've got the outside entities that are driven, mission driven, and caring about what happens to the people in Africatown. And so it has been a tremendous blessing for you guys and for Oberlin to come in our lives. And of course, Joy and I visited the campus in Oberlin, had a wonderful time in terms of the hospitality and having an opportunity to speak to students there, to share what's going on. And the fact that I know that all of you who we've come in contact with are constantly sharing our story. And that's very, very important, because sometimes individuals contact Joe, who's our blogger, and he blogs all the time. So if you get a message at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's from Joe Womack. But people are constantly saying that somebody had referred, and I've had several situations where Oberlin students have referred somebody that have contacted me in terms of talking about Africatown and what can they do to help. So your effort, your energies, your work from an environmental standpoint, from an educational standpoint, and from a personal standpoint, has created a synergy that you should feel proud of, that you've made a mark on history in a way that many students will never be able to do. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much, Major Joe and Mr. Flen, for sharing and joining us today. You don't know how much it means to me and I'm sure to all of us, to be able to hold this space with y'all. I think it's so important to have both of us, all of us here as students and as community collaborators, to be able to have this conversation. And I really don't want to undercut kind of the presence of and the impact that Major Joe and Mr. Flen have on the Africatown community. And, you know, Major Joe is the founder and the president, one of the founders and the president of CHESS, the Clean, Healthy, Educated, Safe, and Sustainable, which is an incredibly impactful and important organization within the community, looking into like community health, environmental health, education. And Mr. Flen, like you mentioned, is the president of the Mobile County Training School Alumni Association. And also just recently, I'm gonna plug that they helped co-found with another Africatown community member, the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation. So Major Joe and Mr. Flen are real movers and shakers in the Africatown community. So thank you so much for being with us here today. And you know, with that being said, I want to invite Isabel to share next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santi. And yeah, thank you again, Major Joe and Mr. Flen. I don't know how I can follow up after y'all, but I'll try. I'm Isabel Tadmiri. I graduated from Oberlin College in 2021, so last year, and I've had the immense privilege to get to be in this collaboration since 2019. So since my sophomore year of college, I joined on the collaboration, and I think I'd like to, before I kind of start talking more about details about the digital archive and the research that our collaboration has done, again, I want to thank Major Joe and Mr. Flen for bringing up two things that I think are really important. First of all, Major Joe, when you mentioned future and that Africatown, within this idea of this conference as crossroads, you mentioned that the community has been at a crossroads for quite some time, and I'd like to echo that and just also even push it more that, you know, the community is at an ongoing crossroads, and that's how I think our collaboration views it. And so there's no like start or finish of that crossroads with Africatown and with Oberlin and Africatown's collaboration, and thus the relationships and that kinship that Mr. Flen, that you were talking about, are needed ongoing and constantly. And that's also what propels us in the Oberlin side of the collaboration, that our kinship and our relationships are ongoing and are also propelling us and give us that constant momentum. So we're so grateful for. Yes, so just wanted to thank you both for making those connections. Yeah, so going back into the kind of details of the digital archive, as you heard from Imani, our digital archive really come from relationships and come from an active consent process, whether it's within the transcription or the editing or the actual interviewing of oral histories. And part of our research in itself is identifying what we can do under that umbrella of the community's momentum. And so we felt this momentum of the oral histories, and we were thinking about the way in which they themselves do mapping. The oral histories themselves map, and Major Joe especially was really key and had many times identified mapping as a key tool that Africatown has, whether with tourism, with storytelling, and so much. So as historians in Africatown often make maps with their oral histories, we decided that creating a complement to the interviews and the transcriptions in the digital archive, we would create this Africatown Community History Digital Archive story map. And so the story map we made serves as a visual tool of expression for historical memory alongside the digital archives, transcribed and videotaped oral histories. And so it's a combination of oral history transcriptions, mapping to document historical sites in Africatown, to document how they've been transformed by public and private forces, such as encroaching industries, such as zoning codes that have been mentioned already. And so using the map to try to focus on those changes, but also to focus on celebrating people, celebrating spaces, and the ways that they empower us by hearing the oral histories, ways they empower the community. And so through reviewing oral history transcripts, conversing with Africatown leaders, Africatown historians, visiting community identified landmarks, we visually mapped Africatown's oral histories as a complement to the digital archive, not to replicate the way in which the oral histories themselves are able to map, but as a complement to the digitalized, the transcribed oral histories, and thus highlighting ways that sites have persisted and changed through the current mapping. So juxtaposing geographic location with legal zoning codes, with oral history locating, with photographic locating. And just in general, the story map is an attempt towards visualizing truth through the historian's own words in a new way, which, as Imani mentioned, is a really important guiding principle for us of the Oberlin Africatown collaboration. And so I think I'm really excited to talk about the story map and bring it into conversation right now, because I see it as something that could be seen as research, but it's also something that can be seen as a really dynamic tool and a dynamic educational resource for truth telling and for the community-led empowerment at the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation and Heritage House. So yeah, we see the story map as an example of finding research momentum within and under the community momentum of Africatown at this point in the crossroads that is always ongoing, and as an example of visualizing truth as a historian's expert truth, and doing work that also aims to be dynamic and usable in its findings. Yeah, I would love to answer any other questions or elaborate more on the specifics of the story map if anyone has questions about how it fits into relationship and such. But with that, I will pass it on to Santi.
Thank you so much for sharing, Isabel, and thank you, everybody. I didn't expect to go last, but here I am. Yeah, my name is Santiago. I use they, them pronouns, and I graduated from Oberlin in 2020 and have since been working in Northern California, trying to find time to contribute to our collaboration in the moments outside of my work schedule. So I'm very happy to be here today. And there's so many things I want to talk about, and we don't have the 5 hours that Major Joe spoke to, which we could really use to get a full picture of the incredible story and history of Africatown, which is something that's really fundamental to the work that we do with Major Joe and Mr. Flen and other community members, which is sharing the story of Africatown. And like Major Joe said, Africatown really has been at a crossroads for a while now, and being able to have been part of this project for the last 4 years or so, it's been so incredible to see all the changes that have happened and all the progress that is made, largely by all the energy that the Africatown community is putting into sharing the story of Africatown and getting the word out about the community. You know, I'm gonna plug a few things. There's been documentaries coming out. There's more documentaries coming out. I don't know. I can't keep track of all of them at this point, but I know that one just recently released that was produced by. Can someone chime in here? Who was it produced by? It was a famous musical artist. I'm this Questlove, yeah, and I think that came out just last month. So there's such really incredible things that are going on, and it's so exciting to see. And you know, one of the important aspects that we see to reparations is truth telling. And Africatown's Oral History Project and the story map and these documentaries are all part of this first step of reparations as we see it, of this idea of truth telling. Because for so long, the truth of the history of Africatown and the truth of what's been going on and the struggles and the obstacles that the community has been facing has not been getting out. And, you know, we've talked a little bit about the history, but already, but you know, the community was founded in the 1860s by the last survivors they're survivors of the last documented ship kidnapping Africans, West Africans to the United States. And the family that purchased the ship and organized this kidnapping still own much of the land in Africatown today. So there's this real legacy and history here that the community is persisting against and fighting against in order to really have sovereignty over the land and over their story. And you know, we've talked a little bit about the Oral History Archive that has been set to go live for some time now. We're really looking forward and waiting for an opportunity where we can come together in person in Africatown as the ongoing pandemic allows. And we're really excited to open that to the public so the world can see the stories that the Africatown community historians have been working really hard to share and to help us document. I wanted to talk a little bit today about kind of how the work and the collaboration with Africatown has impacted me, and the aspects of it that have really stood out to me. And I think the first thing is just really the power of the community of Africatown. That's something that's reiterated over and over and over again in the oral history interviews that we have conducted. So many people have shared how throughout the 20th century and into today, the community has really just been like one big family and mutual support network that has really allowed and enabled Africatown to be this safe haven for folks of African descent in the Deep South throughout the Jim Crow period, and also continue on through this period of industrial encroachment and this real breakthrough moment where the world is getting to see the story of Africatown. And working, getting to start on this project as a student, it really was clear to me like the importance of the work we're doing and how it really differed from what else was going on at the time. I remember that Ife, who you heard speak with us today, helped onboard and invited me into the project. And it started out as a class. And on the first day of class, we all walked in and we didn't totally know what was kind of in store for us. But one of the first things we did is we sat down on a Zoom call before the pandemic, on a Zoom call with folks from Africatown. And we said, what do you need? Like, what research can we do? How can we spend our time to get more information and really pool our resources to do our work as academic students for the benefit of the community. And we were able to that fall then come and present the work that we did in Africatown. And I was able to continue some of that work in my own time outside of Africatown Collaboration in my thesis my senior year, which this idea of community and sanctuary came out of some other interviews of Africatown community historians describing Africatown as a sanctuary that really gave them a place to live their life and create community and space and family and a future for themselves, speaking of Black futures at a crossroads, in spite of the origins of the kidnapping and in spite of the Jim Crow South and in spite of the encroachment of these petrochemical and other industries in Africatown. And yeah, just this idea of community and sanctuary and fugitivity is something that has really fueled like my own exploration of my family history. I was able to explore kind of and put my own family history in communication and conversation with the history of Africatown, and explore kind of the ways that my identity influenced the way that my work in college and with Africatown community members and historians manifested. So that's just a little bit about kind of my perspective on this project. And again, I want to thank everybody for showing up today and sharing. And I want to thank Davin for helping us through our technical difficulties, making sure everything's going smoothly. And now is the time for us for the next 15 minutes or so to get to follow up on some of the things we shared about, maybe take some questions from the folks who are sharing the space with us today. So if anybody has any burning thoughts at the front of their mind or things that they would like to share or ask, this is the moment to do so.
Hi. Yeah, awesome. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you all. I mean, yeah, really all of you for sharing your work. I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine. And so I'm directly in the middle of my dissertation writing and thinking about some of these questions that you all have brought up. So a couple questions for you all, part of the Oral History Project. Some folks, as you kind of label them as historians, Mr. Womack and Mr. Flen. I have a question for you, and then I have a question, yeah, just kind of wrapping up. So I guess my first question is about the multi-step consent. What influenced that? As someone who's just, yeah, I guess I'm gonna be that person who asks the first question about methods. What influenced that, right? Where does that come from? Is that something particular to Oberlin? Right, and so in a lot of ways, what we're talking about is how histories have been stolen from our community. So what made you also attune to that going into your methods?
Well, growing up in Africatown, the history was always there, but it was denied. You know, it was denied by those who was trying to, still hide that crime from the 1800s. And so the real story never really got out. It was talked about amongst the Africatown elders. It wasn't even taught in the school, and it wasn't in history books or anything. But it actually happened, and we knew that it happened because Henry Williams said it happened. He was a historian. If he said something, it happened. Trust me. And so when we found out that the community was in danger of being done away with, I always use this analogy. I'm a military man, and so when you draft a person, you're a private, you give them 3 months of training, then another 3 months of how to shoot a gun, and you put them in the jungle and say, okay, kill somebody and don't be killed. And so the only thing he's concerned about is what we call beans, bullets, and bandages. What am I going to use what's my weapon, to keep me alive? And then so one of our weapons we determined, Allison and I, as we was talking on the phone, was the story. We got to get this story out there. And then we started telling people around Mobile about it. They said, "What? I've never heard that name." You know, I said, "That's a very good story." And then of course everything is timing too. And then we had a big push in cultural history throughout the world, throughout the nation. African American Museum in DC and other things happening. And we look at stories on slavery and stuff, and it's you know, it fell right in that category. It was very interesting. And even when you look at now some of the awards that it just was handed down to at the Sundance Festival. And I think one reason why this particular documentary got some awards was it was different than the others. The others mostly talked about the, you know, the bed in the ship, but this one, and you know, the trip over. But this particular documentary did a good job of tying in 1860 to 2022. You know, you got the same thing happening. You got a group of people who were enslaved and put in an enslaved community, and folks forcing their will on you. And the same thing is happening today, which is why we have these environmental struggles against the same people. And so you know, that's an odyssey in itself. You know, something still going on from years ago, and it should have stopped a long time ago. But it's an interesting story. It's one that has to be told, and we put it out there. And it's been one of our main weapons to sort of, as I often say, hold off the enemy. That, along with the help that, you know, we started doing some other things too, and all of those have sort of come together to sort of, you know, so put us in a position where, you know, we can at least now hold our own. It never ends. Unfortunately, it never ends. Maybe it will one day.
Yeah, I think, you know, thank you, Major Joe, for sharing that. I think, you know, from a student perspective, I can share that coming onto this project when we first took this class together, it was Ifi and I, Ifi was TAing it. We started off thinking about like the method and the two-step consent process to really capturing this history of Africatown. We took a little bit of a crash course on ethical approaches to research, and thinking about, you know, history from the ground up, and looking at the history of the relationships between academic institutions and the communities that they work with, and seeing how so much of that history is dominated by these extractive relationships. And I know that a part of that class, I'm not sure if I can recite the bibliography to you right now, but one of the standout works that comes to mind is James Corburn's Street Science. And, you know, part of that process of recognizing the community members of Africatown as the arbiters of their own truth, as the masters, they are the expert knowledge holders of their history and their and the struggles that they're facing and the victories that they're winning along the way. And part of this consent process is to really include the historians in the work that we're doing on kind of this more like on that more academic side of things. And our mentor Jay, in a lot of the work that she's done, she has even tried to include community members that she worked with both inside of Africatown, even as like a byline on some of the articles that she's put out, and really honoring like how much of like a mutual relationship that this process is. And having that two-step consent process allows us to work really closely with the community members even after the interview is conducted. And I think that part of it, of having them really actually own the rights to their interview, is so important, because it becomes their property. It's their thing that they're allowing us to borrow to, you know, present on this website, which is also a collaborative action, because at any time if they say, hey, I'm not sure I want this on the website anymore, they can take it down because it's theirs. I don't know if anybody has anything else to chime in for that. Yeah.
I think like one small bit both Major Joe and Santi, like really, I feel like, yeah, both have like really answered this question in such a whole way. But I think like also something I think about in the multi-step consent process is that it really makes clear that like the interview is done when the historian says it's done. And sometimes the history is like, sometimes the story is never finished. It's a living story. Oral history is never like, I feel, put to rest, if that makes sense. I feel like in the multi-step consent process, it's also like Santi was mentioning that we get to continue on talking about what is said in the oral history. And so having the multi-step consent process ensures that there is like that relationship that's continuing to be built based on like this initial just like meeting, this initial conversation. This whole process turns like this transcription moment into a continuous conversation in which the oral history can continue on and live on in the ways that the historian really has experienced their story as well. Yeah, that's just one small thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, and also just, yeah, that was really sweet, Imani. I think within the multi-step consent process, it's not 1 step, 2 steps, it can be sometimes 5 steps. And a step could be an email, a step could be a phone call, right? A step isn't necessarily enumerated out within our consent process as you have to sit down and do it this way, and then you have to do it this way. The multi-steps are also whatever that those 2 people need it to be. If someone needs it to be via writing a letter versus if someone wants to text about it, right? There are so many steps within our relationships that sometimes when you like think about it as 2-step or a multi-step consent process, you only think about certain official steps of consent, but we're constantly making that space within our relationship for the consent processes via creating the relationship space. We're creating the consent space is how we like to look at it, I think. And also, I think something that's important about that process in making it and calling it a multi-step consent process is it's also, we're trying to be as transparent as possible with the historian that everything that we do affects like what this artifact of their oral history is, right? When we record something, we have an effect on it, even if it's a recording. We're not saying that we have no effect. It's a relationship between 2 people when you're recording something or when you're writing something down. And I think that might be because like I have a neuroscience, like psychology background to some things that I'm looking at, but like the idea of that, like the way that you're constantly shaping it, and like as the ones that are actually doing the transcribing and recording, wanting to be as transparent with ourselves and with the historians about how our actions are affecting the oral history as well.
And then just to add a bit to Chaz's part of the question of, is that inherent to Oberlin? It's not inherent to Oberlin. It is something that came from like intentional work in this partnership. And part of like, everyone's been talking about transparency, and that's definitely a big part of kind of what Santi was saying, this crash course into ethical collaboration and like things that we have to keep in mind when working with communities. It's this thing of drive-by research, and lots of drive-by research happens where people, take people's intellectual property and stories and then mark it off as their own or present it without paying homage to those people's stories, or those people who like share that knowledge don't even realize when their stories are being taken and shared and disseminated to other folks and aren't credited in ways that they should be credited in. And so we are trying to avoid that. Not only drive-by research, but also community participatory research, because it's not participation, it's a partnership. It is like not even half and half. It is more like Africatown 80%, Oberlin 20%, because they are leading. It's community-led research, really. And so having that multiple step consent process, offers people the opportunity to reclaim their truths that have been taken from them over and over again. And like kind of what everyone has been saying, just like the oral history is continuing to evolve. And like if someone reads a transcript and sees that they said something that maybe they actually don't feel comfortable sharing, they realize like a week later, they can take that out. They can redact information as they choose because that's their truth.
Think about, yeah, just as a political scientist, I would say, I mean, and I guess just as a academic, right? Like, I think you're playing this sort of participation research is kind of the rave right now, right? And I love your framing around community-led research, right? And so always being in tension with the power dynamic, right, of being a researcher working with community, right? And always being aware of that. Thank you for speaking to that. I have more questions, but I will yield my time.
Sounds like you might be able to ask maybe one more question.
Yeah, well then this is particular to General Joe. Is that okay if I refer to you that? And then Mr. Flen, you all talked about—
I love that promotion, General.
Okay. It's a promotion, okay? That's awesome. Well, yeah, you all talked about sort of, community relationship being central to Africatown, and that's sort of what propels you. I guess how do I want to frame this? I guess what about the Black experience, I think, lends itself, speaks to this sort of communal relationship. I think it's a part of our work that we don't always highlight, right? We talk about, justice and equity, right? But there's something about community that I think is very valuable about the Black experience. You talked about also, just dealing with the history. So I don't know if you could just speak to what that means, maybe for Africatown, what that means for you all, particularly as activists and folks who are advocating.
Well, when I think about the community, I think about the family. Everything was surrounding the family, even the school, and even the church. And now, when I let Anderson in, he's gonna go the rest of the night on this, because this is something that he sort of reminded me when we got started, and we were having a community meeting, and that was the key was the community, having the community involved, because the community had been disrespected and overlooked, and as if they weren't even there, just invisible people. And then when the folks came down from the Slave Wreck Project and an African American History Museum out of DC, and came to speak to the community and extract certain data from people and stuff, and he just simply insisted that we have a community meeting. They didn't really want to have one, but we insisted, and then first thing he did got up and addressed the elders in the room, and he mentioned that it was a degree of respect, from what you've done and sit through all your lives, and he said on behalf of the basically the visitors in town, we want to ask for your permission to do this research, to do these studies about Africatown and this and that. We ask for your permission, and then it sort of caught on with them, because as they came back, they kept, they have first thing to do was meet with the community and ask for your permission to do. They didn't need the permission, but it was just a degree of respect. I want to ask you, and that's what we did as we were children growing up. We didn't just walk in the house and open somebody's refrigerator and grab a piece of chicken. We say, could I please have a piece of chicken? And so it's just, and community means everything to what we're trying to do and respect. And that's part of our fight against the industry and the city and politicians. They don't respect the community, and that just make make you mad. It's something that I say sort of all the time is that when I graduated from college and went into the business, the business setting, they give you a lot of training, and part of the training is to not be that angry person in the crowd, to be calm and But then I got into the military, and they said, use your emotion to motivate you. And I find that in order for me to do the job that I want to do, I've got to almost get mad. I got to get mad, and that motivates me. That gets my juices moving, and it gets your juices moving too, And when you see your leader out there, running that ball and running over everybody, you want to get out there and help them. And so those basic instincts you learn from the community is what can carry you through your life, if you allow them to and don't suppress yourself.
I think the other thing is that here again, and Joe is absolutely right. One of the things we have been working on a couple of projects, the Blue Wave Project, the National Park Service, and some others before they discovered the Cotilda. And our whole thing is that we really needed to make sure that whatever took place in the community with community permission. But when you go back and you think about, and as Joe and I were raised, and we didn't talk a lot about the Africans in the community or descendants of the Africans in the community, like Mr. Keevee and Ms. Green and others that we knew were direct descendants of the Cotilda. But even they formed a more council. The African tradition was brought to that community. The elder community was brought to that community. And it was never really talked about, it was acted out. There was these rituals and traditions that were acted out in terms of you always respected your elders. Even when persons were older, and we always had big, large families. There were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 kids in a family. The oldest child, if they were left in charge, you had to respect that older child, even though they were your siblings. And so this whole synergy around respect and honor was a part of our growing up. When we played sports, you waited your turn to participate in an active role and stuff. And so this for us, we felt like, all of our community was like that. People used to sit on their porches and you had to pass by, and if you didn't speak, and they didn't even necessarily have a telephone, before you got home, your parents knew you didn't speak and stuff. So this African tradition was instilled within that community, and for us, for the most part, the community was all Black in terms of who lived there, and we looked out, and people looked out for each other and took care of each other. But there was always truth, and trust was a part of that whole synergy about our community in terms of things taking place. And so what is we've talked about this crossroad, and that crossroad started happening in particular around 1970, 71, when the community and the schools were desegregated and dismantled in so many ways. It really the process began to speed up so fast. And so what Joe and I have tried to do, and what we're continually trying to do, is to remind those who experienced this here and to begin to write and share and document for others what the system, the healthier system that we had that will carry their character and those things that make them the best of who they are, is what we're trying to instill and give back in that process and stuff. And so the community to us was, we understood the community, and we understood it from hands-on, first hand-on kind of thing. And unfortunately, you've got this crossroad now where we're having to fight individuals from disrupting our community. And let me just give you an example of something that we did. I started bringing back homemade kites in the community. And the homemade kites were a system that The older guys would make kites, and you wanted to make kites like those guys made kites. You would go out and you would find sticks, you would get newspaper, you would get whatever and make it. Well, last year, the city of Mobile decided they wanted to have a kite contest, and they called me and asked me if I would help them. I said, do you understand the mission of the kite contest? The kite thing. The kite contest was not necessarily make a kite. It was an intergenerational relationship that was being built. And individuals, little kids and older individuals interacting in terms of having an opportunity to do something together and share in a moment that was special and unique to them for the rest of their lives. Joy and I have experiences with elders that have gone on that we share with others. And when we think about those individuals, we smile, because that's what community is about. Community is about, person may not even be with you anymore, but you smile and you remember and you live up to that truth that they taught you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. That was really fabulous, really great. And I appreciate everyone's time and energy and thought and thoughtfulness that they brought to our conversation today. Unfortunately, I'm very sad to say that I think we're at our time limit. I would love to stay and share more stories about Africatown and all the incredible experiences that we've had and the privilege it's been to work there. But I think this is where we're going to have to close. So again, thank you everybody so much for coming. And we hope to be in Africatown in person soon, as soon as we can. All right. I'm